This is a movie that was created in direct response to the then large amount of politically correct films being produced in Serbia. The movies had become boring and predictable, so a Serbian film was created to be a brutal, hard to ignore in your face parody of the then current climate of cinema in Serbia. And a Serbian film absolutely achieves this, but by being one of the most vile, disgusting and stomach-wrenching movies to ever hit the mainstream. Everything about this movie is one big middle finger political statement, which takes it to the absolute extremes. I am serious. I've covered some gruesome things on this channel before, but the themes of this movie take it much further, beyond the likes of anything I've covered so far. So I need to warn you, if you don't think you can handle that, then don't proceed with this video, because you'll probably regret it. It's about to get extremely dark and disturbing. The movie starts rather uncomfortably, with a young boy watching his father act in a pornographic movie. The mother and father walk in and basically try to explain away what the kid has just seen. The father, Milas, is an ex-adult film star who was apparently extremely popular within the world of adult entertainment due to his particular set of skills. Right away, this movie is putting you in an uncomfortable situation by showing you a young boy who was clearly too young to be watching this stuff get exposed to what his father used to do for a living. This movie has literally just started, and it's already an uncomfortable situation to watch. But by the time this movie is over, this scene is going to feel about as equivalent as watching a children's cartoon. It's tame compared to what direction things will be taken later on. Milas, the father, receives an offer from an ex-colleague trying to get him back into the game after a director is asked for him, specifically with the promise of a large paycheck. He's trying to put that line of work in the past, but it's made clear that the family are starting to have some money issues. So Milos decides to at least hear this guy out and get an understanding of what he may be required to do. But this time it's different. It would be nothing like Milos has ever done before. The director likes real situations with real people, raw, unfiltered content to achieve this vision. He requires Milos to know absolutely nothing, to just do what he does best. The only people who are going to know anything about it are the people orchestrating it. After some consideration and discussing it with his wife, he decides the promise of that much money is simply just too much to refuse, so he accepts the offer and signs the contract. Sometime later, Melas is picked up from his home and driven to a location, the location being a fairly empty and quiet-looking orphanage. He's handed an earpiece, gets out of the car to see a man pointing a camera at him, and then starts receiving directions relayed to him through the earpiece. Hesitant and slightly confused by the whole situation, he opens the door to be greeted by another camera in his face. As he then slowly walks down the hallway, he notices a young girl looking sad, sitting at the bottom of some stairs. The mother enters the hallway looking for her and begins shouting at her, slaps her, and then drags her away. Another woman appears and takes him into a dimly lit room with TV monitors on the wall. She begins to perform oral on him when the TVs come on, displaying footage of the same young girl. Yeah, I did say this was gonna be messed up. Unfortunately, this doesn't scratch the surface of how demented things will get. That's the end of the first day of filming, and then we get some intermission scenes of Milas calling his police officer brother, asking him to run a background check on the man responsible for the creation of this brother. Disturbingly, we see that after the brother hangs up the phone, the camera pans back to show the brother receiving a sexual act, while home videos of Milas, his wife, and son are being played on the TV. This brother's got some pretty serious issues and is deeply jealous of Milas and the life he's created for himself. Somehow, Milas decides to continue carrying on with this project. I'm not sure why the whole incident involving the young girl on the TV screens wasn't enough to make him nope the heck out of the situation. But as we'll soon discover, I doubt he would be able to leave even if he wanted to. The second day of filming involves him being blindfolded and escorted to an unknown location, where he is taken into a dimly lit room. He witnesses a woman on the floor, crying and being assaulted. Then she crawls over to him and to engage in sexual acts. This being an adult film and what Milas is here to do, of course, he doesn't do anything to stop it. That is until he looks up and notices the young girl from before, just sitting there and staring at him. While this happens, Milas, disgusted upon noticing her, resists and protests carrying on any further, but is restrained from behind, and the woman chomps down on his manhood, resulting in him punching her multiple times after being repeatedly told to do so. Once the deed is done, the director walks in, but Milo storms out of there, knocking out the guy who restrained him in the process. The first day was an incredibly weird and bizarre situation, but this is too far. So he decides that he's going to personally see the director tomorrow, that he can retire face to face. But what Milos doesn't realize is that there's no way out of this. It's too late, and he's already begun. After informing the director that he will not be continuing with this line of work, he is shown one of the most vile, disgusting, and disturbing things ever to be recorded on tape, somehow with the director fully expecting this to win him back over. This is the caliber we're dealing with when it comes to this guy's sanity. The tape includes a pregnant woman in labor, lying on a table in a dark, disgusting looking room. A man who looks to be Milos' driver enters the room and begins to deliver the child after the child is born, and he makes sure it's breathing. He begins to well, sexually assaulted in the worst possible way, as the mother just sits there smiling at the situation. Jesus, didn't think I'd ever say anything like that out loud. Milos does the sensible thing in the situation in standing up, getting the hell out of there. A Serbian film is attempting to take it to the absolute extreme. It's deliberately making a point of being the most vile and disgusting piece of media that it could possibly be. What's the thing that society deems to be pure and innocent and must be protected at all costs? Children. This movie knows that, and it's going for the low blow. It's hitting you where it will absolutely hurt, and knows it's going to invoke some sort of reaction from you. This being a parody of politically correct films, and being an over-the-top, exaggerated attempt at doing so well, it absolutely achieves its goal. It wants you to think this is absolutely the most vile, abhorrent, and disgusting thing you've ever witnessed. But unfortunately, the shocking factor has only really just begun. The film is not done mentally disturbing you yet. After attempting to drive home, Milos wakes up in his house, confused and covered in blood, with no sign of his family. He goes back to the director's house, now carrying a metal pipe, venturing deeper and deeper into the house, getting flashbacks of him being there before. He remembers that he was forcefully injected with bull Viagra, which in turn makes him extremely sexually aggressive. He loses all of his ability to reason and be reasoned with. There's only one thing he wants, and he'll do anything to get it. They tie a woman to a bed and let him loose on her, with his inhibitions being entirely non-existent. At this point, he does whatever these people tell him to do, which starts off with him punching this woman, and graduating to him slicing of her head with a machete, and continuing to go at it. Upon remembering these acts he's committing, Milos drops the floor and pukes. Before then, deciding that he needs to find these recordings of him in order to piece together what's happened during the time he was drugged. He takes the recordings out to the woods and begins watching them. He finds out that he was also sexually assaulted as he lay on the ground unconscious, and that his friend who convinced him to do the job, upon finding out what the director has actually been having him do, decides to try and get him released. It cuts to a scene with her being held captive, where she's clearly been tortured, as all of her teeth have been pulled out from her mouth, as well as being physically tortured. She is then also sexually assaulted to death. After seeing what he's just witnessed, Milos attempts to get up and just walk away from it all, but he has another flashback. This time it's his wife covered in blood. So he decides that he needs to persevere and continue watching in order to help his family. He triggers a flashback of him wandering the streets and calling his brother from a payphone, asking for him to come and help him. He sits in an alleyway waiting, and presumably, with the bull Viagra still coursing through his body, he can't help but pull out his penis and stuff, touching it as a woman walks past. Two people, upon seeing this, decide to start attacking him, but the driver who works for the director pulls up, murders both of the men, and puts Milos into the car. You might think, like any reasonable person would, that after everything this movie has presented so far, there couldn't really be anything worse waiting in store for as well. There's a reason a Serbian film has garnered a reputation as being one of the most notorious, disturbing movies out there. Milos remembers a warehouse they took him to and discovers a room covered in blood. He remembers that he was injected with more bull Viagra, therefore, then taking a syringe of it and stabbing it into the nurse's neck, later resulting in her death. And then he proceeds to sexually assault her. Present Milos walks into a room with multiple bloody corpses strewn across the floor and a camera pointed at a bed. He remembers that he was taken into that room where there were two unconscious people lying on the bed with the top halves of their bodies covered, hiding their identities now. In a savage state, after the bull Viagra has fully kicked in, he is let loose onto both of the unconscious people. Once he moves on to the second person, a masked man joins in as well. The director removes the mask from the man, revealing it to actually be his police officer brother, explaining how they were able to find him being beaten up in that alleyway. The director then removes the sheets, covering the unconscious people, for Milos to then discover that the people are, in fact, his wife and son Yeo. I told you this movie pulls no punches, and I meant it. Upon realizing what he's just done, he jumps up in a fit of rage and proceeds to repeatedly bash the director's brains into the floor. His wife, after coming to during the ordeal, latches onto the police officer brother, bites a chunk out of his neck, then grabs a nearby statue bust and continues to crush his skull with it. Milos gets a hold of one of the guard's guns and proceeds to start shooting people. He gets into a scuffle with the last surviving guard and then proceeds to kill him by inserting his manhead into this guy's eye socket. So yeah, that happened. The thing is, after all of this misery and destruction, the movie isn't even finished dishing it out yet. This film was like a relentless beating. Now it wants to slap you in the face one more time, for good measure. He then remembers that, after this whole ordeal, he took his family home, locked them in the basement, and then attempted to shoot himself. After returning to his family, we get a few cuts of, presumably, the events of the next day or so, showing the family absolutely ruined. You can see the look of devastation on their faces. It's as if after everything they went through, they no longer feel any emotion. They decide after what's happened, they just can't go on any longer. They cuddle in bed, as Milos points a gun through the back of his wife, ensuring the bullet will travel through all three of them before then pulling the trigger. A day later, we see three men standing over the corpses, a new director and two cameramen. The director proceeds to say, "Start with the little one." One of the guys starts to then unzip his trousers, and then the movie ends well. What a pleasant watch I find that with a lot of movies, which could be considered disturbing. Under all of the shock and horror lays an actual good piece of media. With a Serbian film, I don't think that's the case. It purely exists with one sole intention, being as absolutely vile and disgusting as it possibly can, in hopes of creating a statement through controversy. And if you view it through that lens, well, then it absolutely achieves the goal it sets out to do. It's a message aimed at the film industry in Serbia. The filmmakers found the climate to be far too politically correct and weren't happy with the way things were going there. They wanted to create something that would forever change the way people associate movies with Serbia. And they did. They wanted this associated with Serbia so much that they named it a Serbian film. I'm not sure how much more of a direct message you could possibly send with something like this. Every time I hear about Serbia, I can't but be reminded of this movie. If the filmmakers wanted to cause some Serbian controversy and get people talking, well, it worked. I can't help but associate this movie with Serbia. Whenever it's mentioned, movies have the potential to make you feel sorts of different emotions. They are a form of art, and art in its most simple form is something which invokes an emotional, once it's just that. The emotional response that this movie wants to invoke is disgust, anger, sadness and fear, you know, the fun ones.